Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast powered by Believe Network. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. We're going to get into a little bit of the state of the union, if you will, for the New York Rangers this upcoming season. The best case, the worst case, what the middle ground could look like. More importantly, though, Nick, you're back from vacation. Where were you? What'd you do? Because you look like you had the time of your life.
I was in Ireland. I saw Oasis. I'm going to see Oasis again next weekend at MetLife. If Texas covers 3.5, I'm going to go to Oasis on Monday as well. So we're making things happen.
He's hedging his bets. Oh my God!
Yeah.
If Texas, how much you put on that game?
Only like $150.
Oh my God!
Nothing too crazy.
Yeah,
$150 plus 3.5 at 142. We'll be all right. We'll make that happen. Matt Patricia's an Ohio State defensive coordinator, which I learned this morning, which really put me over the edge to make the decision there. But it's radio silence still, man. There ain't a whole lot going on. Like every day I open the Athletic app, I scroll college football, NFL, even the NBA, who, is on the same calendar relatively as the NHL. There's more stuff in there than there is about the NBA. I mean, hell, the national mailbag column led with how does salary cap accrual work last week? I mean, there's really not a lot going on right now in the hockey world. You had the Nazar extension last week. The Rangers are effectively radio silent. We'll start getting tidbits the closer we get to training camp, which is still probably at least a week or two away. But it's time to start looking towards next season. A lot of this summer has been, last year was an absolute tire fire, the worst possible case scenario. What does that mean going forward? And that's really where this conversation for today's show starts. And we did an episode at some point in July where we talked about, just based on math, just outright math, the Rangers almost certainly can't be as bad as they were last year.
You would think.
They had so many things go wrong for them last year. They had that stretch where they went 5-15 from December through January, and they still only finished 6 points out of the last playoff spot. Of course, last year, the East, maybe the weakest it's ever been, allowing them to stay in the mix as long as they were. But to just get a baseline, right now, the Rangers are at 95.5 as their preseason over-under. They're 27-1 to win the Stanley Cup, and they're minus 190 to make the playoffs. All of that tells you, at least the betting market suppose, the Rangers should make the playoffs. And I think we've been pretty consistent that this team should make the playoffs, that if everybody performs to their abilities, even with the question marks, whether that's the defense or the bottom six, which if Zibanejad plays the wing, that bottom six is basically 6 question marks. So when you think about it, just in terms of the broad picture, what people outside of the Rangers sphere think of things, this is a playoff team, but beyond that, it is entirely contingent upon the guys who are here to effectively, grab the rope, take the opportunity, whatever phraseology you want to use.
Right.
Because most people don't expect a whole lot from them. And I put myself in that camp that, sure, they can make the playoffs. If they get a good first-round matchup, they maybe even win a round. But beyond that, it's hard to envision a world where this group, where we saw them so badly exposed last year, would be able to make some type of run.
The outcomes for this team are endless. Like, if you could convince me that Drury trades Carson Soucy for Connor McDavid somehow, and they make that work under the cap somehow, and they go on this magical run and they fix all their problems and they win the cup. You could also convince me that the Rangers continue to be as bad as they were last year. They missed the playoffs again. And then there's a massive fire sale that happens at the end of the year. You can convince me of that. You can convince me that this team is going to make the playoffs because they couldn't possibly be as bad as they were last year. But then they flame out maybe in the first round, maybe in the second round because of the issues that we've talked about for years on the show. Once again, rear their ugly head. And here we are once again in, late April, early May, talking about how they're eliminated from the playoffs. Like there's so many in-betweens to that too, that you can, reasonably argue and make a point for. And that's one of the hardest things when you're trying to project a team. Like, obviously, when you're a fan of a team, you want them to do well. But when you're trying to project how a team's going to do, this team is very difficult to project for. Because we've seen the best of the best when they won the President's Trophy. They were everything that they possibly could have done was best case scenario, and all the shots were going in and nothing was going in their own net. versus last year where nothing was going right. Everything was going in their own net and nothing was going the opponent's net. So surely there's some sort of in between here, but what that looks like in terms of this team and next season, you could it's that episode. It's a scene from like the Simpsons movie where that you lay out 5 plans and you just, I think it was Homer, whoever it was, like picks just one out of, one off the table and says, yeah, that's it. Doesn't read it. Doesn't do anything like that. You could convince me of any of these.
So starting with the first part of this conversation, last year they finished with 85 points. The over under for them this year upcoming is 95.5. So for perspective, if they had gone over that total last year, they had 96 standing points. They would have played the Carolina Hurricanes in the first round last year. If you'll recall, the Rangers went 0-4 against the Hurricanes in the regular season. They were outscored 18-7 across those 4 games. So let's start there. They finished 95, 96, somewhere in the high 90s for standings points. That's almost assuredly enough to make the playoffs, even if you want to account for Montreal getting better, even if you want to account for maybe Ottawa, maybe a team in that lower tier like Detroit perhaps getting closer to that mid-90s, low 90s benchmark to be a wild card team. Maybe the Islanders overachieve, whatever. If you're looking just at the Metro, one of the easiest paths for the Rangers to make the playoffs is straightforward. You get one of those 3 spots in your division. I think the Rangers are capable of being better than the Capitals. I think that's not out of the realm of possibility. Can they be better than the Devils? It massively depends on how healthy the Devils are and if any of their young guys, specifically Nemitz or Seamus Casey, perhaps maybe Luke Hughes, take steps on their back end. Can they be better than the Hurricanes? Probably not. I think I'm firmly in the camp that, at least in the regular season, over the long run, I think Carolina is definitely the best team in this division. And that kind of frames where I think a lot about this team and how I feel. Because, like I said at the top, the bottom 6 is basically one big question mark. Like, I know everybody's just written Edstrom, Rempe, Carrick, and Penn for the 4th line. They played 80 minutes last year together, and yeah, they outscored opponents 4-0, but that was 80 minutes in an 82-game season, and they did it outperforming their expected goals and their high danger chances and their scoring chances. So, like, even if you like that group, and like on paper, I can see a world where 2 giants and Sam Carrick can kind of work as a shot suppressing cycle 4th line.
He's a giant in our hearts, Nick.
Yeah. Carrick's not a short guy, but next to Edstrom and Rempe, he looks like a short guy. That's really the conundrum here. And the other component to this that I was curious about what the actual exact number was, but I wanted to go and look. The Rangers lost 66 goals from last year's team between the guys they traded away, who, even though they weren't in the, on the team at the end of the season, those goals still were on the team last year. Capo Caco's 4 goals, not a lot, but those are 4 of the 255. You lose Chris Kreider's 20-something goals. You lose the variety of goals from all the little ones, all the guys you traded throughout the course of the year. And we talked about on that episode a few weeks ago, the math one, the positive regression one. That's what you're banking on here, effectively. You are banking on positive regression for your stars, for Panarin, for Zibanejad, for Trocheck, for Lafreniere, I would put in that category as well, even though he doesn't profile as a star so far. They expect him to be one. They are paying him like he is going to be one of the best players on this team. That is going
you don't draft a guy first overall without the expectation that they're going to be a star.
Especially being that they staked on him. They put the chips in and gave him that contract based off of the career year 2 years ago, and they are banking on him taking a step. Now, he doesn't need to be Austin Matthews or Matthew Tkachuk. They do need 60 to 70 points out of him, which is not unreasonable if he's going to play with Panarin and Zibanejad or Miller and Zibanejad. If he's going to be in the top 6, if he's going to get power play one time, which in theory he should, it is not unreasonable to say he needs to be better. I think we can all agree that. Yeah. But at the same time, and we've talked about this a lot, until they do it, you can't bank on it. And that has been my biggest issue with the way Chris Drury has assembled his roster over the last 4 years. It has always been, it's all going to work out. Everything is going to be fine. Perfect example. Now, after 4 years, of being a 3rd pair right-handed defenseman, revolving door of partners on the left, nagging shoulder injury that gets surgery 2 years after the initial injury. Everybody who covers the team is just writing in pen, Braden Schneider's going to be the 2nd pair left defenseman. What in the last 4 years has indicated Braden Schneider can be a matchup defenseman on his offside and carry a pair? This is a guy who, other than those 40 games or so with Eric Gustafsson, doesn't have a great statistical profile. And then you're going to ask him to play harder minutes against better opponents and more difficult situations. You're going to probably slide him up onto your first penalty kill unit as well in that Trouba spot from the last couple of seasons. And that is going to work out. This is a team that is supposed to contend for a Stanley Cup that's elevating a guy who's never played more than like 15 minutes per night. And that's the roster construction. I think you can point to things like the way they handled a lot of the depth over the last few years. Just the idea that, yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out what the fourth line is. I think about all the time that in 2022, the first year, at the fall 21 going into the 22 season, the fourth line opening night was Barclay Goodrow, Ryan Reeves, and Vitaly Kravtsov. The most hodgepodge thrown together. It's fine. There's 3 hockey players. We like all of them. They'll figure it out. And that has largely been my critique, that the Rangers acquire guys who are good at something. They see them good at something somewhere else and then drop them here and say, okay, do what you did there, with no context as to how they were successful at doing what they were doing in the first place. And then they look around mystified as to why it's not working out. And that's really what it comes down to as far as what we're talking about right now. In regards to just meeting expectations, performance going into this upcoming season. They have so many question marks. Who of Berard, Othman, Perreault is making the team? Can you count on Juuso Parssinen as the third line center?
And if they're not making the team, are you trading them? Or because what are they doing if they're not on the team? At this point of their, I understand that they're still young and all these things, but they should be on the NHL team. On some NHL team. If you're not going to play them here, you probably should deal the ones that aren't making the team for a player that will be on the team.
They can't afford. That's the other problem.
Right.
Like, even if you wanted to trade, you can't because you have no cap space. You couldn't turn Brennan Othman into, a top 4 defenseman.
We're trying to find the guy who did this. It's like, yeah,
that is the biggest. I was going to make a political joke, but I'll refrain. We're going to find out who did this. Passive voice. People were killed today. By who? That's how everybody who covers the Rangers talks about the salary cap. Chris Drury is dealing with a mess. Well, who made the mess? The abdication of responsibility for the salary cap situation. They could have had $10, $15 million of cap space going into July 1st and really overhauled the roster. But instead, they did Borgen, Vakanainen, Parssinen. They gave guys raises like Edstrom and Rempe, who frankly didn't play their way into raises. And look, $200,000 doesn't kill you, but $200,000, $250,000, $300,000, that's a $1 million really quick. And $1.5 million versus $2.5 million, those are very different tiers of bottom 6 player. You get a really useful, functional bottom 6 guy at $2.5 million. And instead, you're going into this year with a bottom 6 that is only question marks. And look, the top 6 is good enough that it should be able to get them to the playoffs. But the bottom 6 is
emphasis on should.
The bottom 6 is an integral part of this. I don't want to use hyperbole here, but it's not an exaggeration to say that one of the driving forces of success in the regular season for the Rangers, especially the first Peter Laviolette season, and then midway through the Gallant tier, was that they rolled 3 lines that were capable of scoring. That Hedl line at the start of last year, they went a month with that. They outscored opponents 15-2 through the end of November, that Hedl, Kakko, Cooley line. They were the team's best line at 5-on-5. Now the third line is Juuso Parssinen, Brett Berard, Brennan Othman, Gabriel Perreault, Johnny Brodzinski. Pick whichever 3 of those guys you like, and let's see what happens.
There's just the ultimate question that you have to ask yourself is this: when the first 2 lines aren't on the ice because these guys cannot play 60 minutes every single night, who is going to score for you? Vibes are great, and we talked about, somebody like Taylor Radish can chip in, right? Like you
hope, sure, he can pencil in 10 to 15 goals.
You hope that some of these guys can help answer some of these questions that we're seeing in the bottom 6. But overall, still, you think about what a really successful team looks like. Okay, well, you look at
the Panthers won the Stanley Cup where their third line was the best line on the team. Marchand, Luosterainen, and Lundell outscored opponents. I think it was 20-5 in 4 rounds. They smoked opponents. Well, that's the third line.
When you think about how most teams construct their roster, where the bottom 6 guys aren't necessarily the best players, but guys that can, chip in when they can, or, but the players that play in the bottom 6 tend to have more issues than those at the top 6. That's, I'm not breaking any news here, but when you have a team like the Panthers that are built like they are, and you put Brad Marchand on the third line, what is he going to do against pretty much every other third line in the NHL? Skate circles around them, because that is what really good roster construction looks like. When you have a third line that can essentially beat out any other third line in the NHL.
They outscored the McDavid line head-to-head in the final.
Right.
Like, that level of depth is insane. And, like, everybody looked at that Tampa Bay team from a couple years ago, the Coleman, Gord, and Gaudreau line, and said, we need our version of that. And then the Rangers took the worst guy from that line and said, do it for us. And then looked around perplexed as to why Barclay Gaudreau wasn't driving offense. Depth matters a lot. It was the Oilers' undoing this year in the Stanley Cup final. I would dare to say it was the Stars' undoing. I would dare to say it was the Jets' undoing, the Avalanche's undoing, because at a baseline, and we've talked about this a lot over the years, when you get to a conference final, your top 6s are effectively going to cancel each other out. They're relatively even. If you can get to the Final 4, your top 6 is going to be just about as good, maybe a little better, a little worse than the other teams. That is where your depth comes out and where it shines out. The Oilers had, I want to say, 15 different guys score at least one goal getting to the Stanley Cup final. The Panthers had like 20 different guys score at least one goal on their way to winning the whole thing. And it's not for lack of trying. The Rangers they don't have a choice now. They have to give these guys opportunities in the bottom 6. And that's kind of a good thing, that we can't be playing guys like Colin Blackwell over Gabriel Perreault. Like, they do not have a choice. They need these guys to hit, and now. But at the same time, all of this is hypothetical. Gabriel Perreault is an idea at this point. He is not a proven asset. Othman, with each passing day, I am less convinced that this is going to be an important NHL player. A regular, sure. Can he play 300-400 games at the NHL level? Yeah, I'll give you that. But that's not what you're doing when you pick 15th, 16th overall. That's not the goal. And that's really the conundrum here, because there's enough talent to be fine. And the Rangers should, again, emphasis on should, be fine. But what does that do for the big picture? Because 95.5 standings points, that's doable. If I were a betting man, which I am, I would be pretty inclined to take that over 95.5, because that's a reasonable number. That's only, 5 more wins than last year. Yeah. So instead of going 5-15, you go 10-10. Okay. Instead of going as bad as humanly possible, where the Rangers were 29th in the entire NHL at one point when that streak was over, they can go 500. They can be, what the Devils were once everyone got hurt last year. That's not out of the realm of possibility.
Well, I think too, I don't want to discount the Mike Sullivan new coach bump.
For sure.
I think that's a real bonus heading into the season. Like, if Peter Laviolette was still the coach, I think I'd be a lot more negative about the trajectory of the team. But with a new coach and somebody that is, by all accounts, really good at it, I would have to think that, there might be some growing pains, especially early on, as players figure out the new machinations of what Mike Sullivan wants. If you remember back in 2013-14, when they made the final, the Rangers lost like 9-2 to San Jose in October.
Yep.
Marty Biron retired after that game because of Tomáš's hurdle. It was a four-goal performance. The between the legs, like the Sharks were dunking on the Rangers. And then once they figured out AV's system, they won pretty much every game, in the regular season. Then they went to the final, right? So you could see some of that early on. And, the red alarm should sound if that happens in like December. But if, it might happen in October, it might happen in November. And, I think early results, if they go poorly, and if they go like super well too, I think if the Rangers start like 12-0 for some reason, like that might, that's obviously going to come down back down to earth, etc. It will even out eventually. But I do want to highlight that Mike Sullivan bringing in his playbook and the way that he wants this team to play.
Don't forget David Quinn.
How could we forget? How could we possibly forget the man, the myth, the legend returns to return the man with the signal in the sky returns to Gotham City. Yeah, but I don't want to discount with a new coaching staff, if you will, the new, I don't want to say identity of this team, because their identity is going to be pretty much the same because it's the same guys in the locker room, but they're going to play a style that Mike Sullivan is going to want. And I do think that is going to, at least short term, going to bring in some positive results.
It's a great question. And we debate this all of the time, what the value of a good coach in the NHL is. And it's not the most one-to-one. You know, it's not like football where if you have a really good play caller, you can kind of manufacture your way through games with an average quarterback, the way the Vikings have been able to with Kevin O'Connell because he's such a good play caller. You would think that, you know, in an ideal world, you get a reasonable version of what the Blues got, the Jim Montgomery bump, where Montgomery got there midway through the season last year. And look, I don't think the Rangers have the discipline, frankly, to play as good of defense, but the Blues were the best team in hockey last year after the Four Nations faceoff break. They came back end of February. The Blues had the best record down the stretch of the regular season last year.
And by the way, the Blues hired a head coach, and then Jim Montgomery became available, and they're like, wait, this guy's available? Oh,
we got to
Drew
do
Bannister, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to do this, but like, we gotta make but that's something that the Rangers will just never do.
No, the last time they did the in-season thing was Tom Rennie, and that was 15 years ago. And
and obviously now with Mike Sullivan, you shouldn't do that.
No,
keep Mike Sullivan. I'm just saying, you know, as an idea, that's not something I foresee this organization doing at any point.
No, the last team I could think of before the Blues to do that was Montreal with Claude Julien. When Boston fired him, they fired Michel Therrien and they hired Claude Julien midseason. They got a nice little bump from that. And the new coach thing is a great question, because what does that mean? You think about what were the Penguins great at when they were at their best at the latter half of the last decade, and that was using all three lines very well. That Hagelin, Bonino, Kessel line, of course, very famously an integral part of their Stanley Cup final run, assembling that Chris Letang, Brian Dumoulin pair that was one of the best first pairs of the 2010s in the postseason, some of the best underlying numbers we've seen. They've gotten, and they got by with, I would venture to say, slightly above average goaltending between Matt Murray and Marc-Andre Fleury, able to win cups there. So I think that's one of the real questions I have, and something I'm very curious to see. How does Mike Sullivan handle having a good goalie for the first time in a long time? What does that do for his calculus and how he wants to assemble things? And look,
that's a good point as well, because I would have to think that some of his playbook, I don't want to say was greatly altered by his, let's just say, average goaltending for I don't want to go too negative. This is not the greatest goaltending of all time. I would have to imagine he tweaked it because he knew he didn't have Patrick Waugh in net for his entire tenure behind the Penguins behind the Penguins bench. But now that he essentially has one of the best goalies on the planet right now behind him, I wonder if that makes his offensive playbook more aggressive. I wonder if he has looked at his own playbook and said, okay, well, this is how I want my forwards to play in Pittsburgh because I didn't trust my goalie to make a save. But now that I can, does that, I wonder if Mike is thinking to himself like, oh, I wonder if now I can make my forwards, pinch more or stay in the offensive zone more or take more risks, because if the risk doesn't work out, I have a goalie that I can trust to make a save.
So what I would say to that, and again, it's been a while since I've brushed up on my Penguins tape. And being that the Penguins haven't been good in a while, I don't know how applicable the last 2 or 3 years of Penguins hockey is to where the Rangers are at now. But one of the core tenets of Mike Sullivan hockey is aggressively forechecking. And I don't know if you recall this, but I feel like going back to maybe Maybe Alain Vigneault, there has been every couple weeks, a passive aggressive comment about, well, we just got to start playing more north-south. We got to get the puck in deep. We got to stop trying to be fancy. We got to stop trying to pass the puck into the net. And it's the same story. We have said for 3 summers in a row now, you are not getting Zibanejad, Panarin. You're not getting these guys to change what they've done. These guys are 10 plus years into NHL careers, and they have been wildly successful in the context of their sport. As much as we get on Zibanejad, he's going to hit 1,000 NHL games by the time this contract's over. Yep. He's going to put together a top 5-10 Rangers resume of all time when it's all said and done in terms of his counting stats. You're not convincing that guy he needs to change what he's doing. You're not convincing him that he's the problem. And that's one of the real problems here. The Rangers don't have enough diversity in their skill sets. They don't have aggressive forecheckers who are high-end players. Look, can Cooley be a 20-25 goal guy? Can he be, a facsimile for Zach Hyman? Yeah, I think he can be a 20-25 goal guy, forecheck very well, hit a lot. But he doesn't have that dynamic ability. He doesn't have that explosive ability to create offense for himself in the same way that, Nathan McKinnon or Matthew Tkachuk or even Brady Tkachuk, where I wouldn't say Matthew or Brady are nearly as explosive as McKinnon, but they hit everything that moves. They are great forecheckers, and they can make offense for themselves. Other than Panarin, who his ability to make offense for himself is tenuous at times, the Rangers don't have any of that. Then they don't have, their layups. They don't have their bread and butter. They don't have anything easy to do. They don't have set plays in the same way. And look, hockey's different from the other sports, of course, but they don't have something they can consistently draw upon to get to. It's a lot of individual guys making plays outside of structure, trying to pass the puck into the net, as opposed to a more regimented, structured. And maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's what makes Mike Sullivan a better coach, is he can get that through to this veteran group. Because as much as we want to think Mike Sullivan is going to change things, it's incumbent upon these guys to buy that. And you saw this group effectively do the Emperor's No Clothes season. We saw them entirely capitulate. They brought in J.T. Miller as if one guy alone would change the tide of everything. And it didn't, because the other guys were still here. You can only change so many guys from a roster in a given season. And Chris Drury tried last year to overhaul the roster in season. But you are asking guys to effectively pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Zibanejad had the worst season of his career since getting to New York. Panarin had a relatively poor counting stat season. Trocheck had a poor counting stat season. Lafreniere, there are people who want to give him away. His season was so disappointing last year in the context of the year before. That's asking a lot of those guys. And I can vividly recall an episode we did in December of last year when they were in that death spiral. And we were talking about how the team had no confidence. They were playing terribly. They couldn't make anything happen. Even simple passes, it was hard to string 3 in a row together. And we kept hammering, well, they have no confidence. They can't get it back on the tracks. The coach isn't getting through to them. There's nobody on that team taking leadership. JT Miller showed up. That didn't do anything. Yeah, he put up better counting stats, and Zibanejad played better by virtue of having a better line mate, but that didn't make Zibanejad play better hockey. Didn't make him better defensively. Didn't make him forecheck more aggressively. And that's the thing here, man. There is enough talent here that they should be okay. But you are asking a lot of us to put a lot on faith right now. And last season is all the proof you need as to why you shouldn't put all the faith on these guys.
Yeah, you can change one guy. You can even change the head coach. And, I would have to think, because at this point, there's no other option. The number one thing that I have to think is, okay, Mike Sullivan went to Sweden when he talked to Mika Zibanejad and actually hammered some stuff out. Because there's no plan B here. No. Mika Zibanejad has a no move clause, and he's not going anywhere, and you can't make him go. And it's up to Mike Sullivan to make Mika play the way that Mike Sullivan wants. So I would all of my chips are in this one basket because there is no other basket. I have to put all of them here, and there's other than if I don't put them there, they're just gonna fall, and someone else will pick them up. That's free money for them, right? So I have to go all in on the idea that Mike Sullivan has talked to Mika Zibanejad, that he's talked to Panarin, that he's talked to Lafreniere, that he's talked to these guys that he is expecting actual change from, and getting them on the same page. I would have to think that, obviously these conversations are held behind closed doors. I would have to imagine there's been a lot of, smack talk about what didn't work, with Laviolette and, why that season was so miserable for them, et cetera. I would have to, think that those honest conversations with the new head coach went down, in these guys' homes and whatnot. The challenge now is, okay, well, you've talked to these guys and that's, hopefully they've bought in, and maybe you'll see that in training camp and these practices, and maybe you'll see it in preseason. Well, are you going to see it in game 24? Are you going to see it, the 3 games before the All-Star game when everyone's already checked out because they want to get to the All-Star break? Like, those are the kinds these conversations now are what dictate those types of moments. Yep. If Mike Sullivan has genuinely talked to the stars of this team and has genuinely changed their mindset and their approach and has gotten them to buy into his system, we will see those positive changes in moments where we otherwise wouldn't have. In the back-to-back late night game in November, in the, game before a longer break, where you'll see that extra effort come alive. It won't happen, every shift of every game, but in the moments where you need them to, they will show up. And that is when you will know for sure that Mike Sullivan's plan, his system, and his message has clearly been delivered to the players.
So, Andrew, I have a question for you. Do you know what the 2 most bet football games are of every week? There's a very specific answer, and it'll make sense, and it's in the context of this conversation.
Is it the Thursday night game?
No, but you're in the right ballpark. You have the right.
Is it the big matchup on a Sunday? I would have to think.
So yeah, it's Monday Night Football. Okay, because that is the last game of the week. Right. That is your last chance to win your money back before you have to settle up. Before you have to go.
This is how much I know about betting and about football, by the way.
Monday is the last game of the week. Thursday is the first game of the week. So you're trying to get back to even ahead of Thursday, so you have more money to bet again. And then the other most bet game of the week is Hawaii football, college football, and that's because that game kicks off at 11 or 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That is your last college football game of the night to try and be close to even or win your money back, so that you can bet more money on the NFL in the morning when you wake up. That is where the Rangers are at right now. They
Call the number, by the way.
They are betting. That's the speech that Pacino gives to Matt McConaughey at the beginning of The Color of Money. The Color of Money? No, 2 for the Money, where he's taught, where it's a movie about sports betting. But those are the 2 most bet games of the week, and that's where the Rangers are at. They are on the phone with their bookie, begging that they are good for it. That, yeah, man, I got it, but I want Hawaii tonight and the points. Yeah, man, I got it. We're going to win this game tonight, and then we're going to roll it over to Thursday. That's where they are. The Rangers are the guy who is desperately trying to salvage what they have. And look, there's enough here. We still got the house. We can put the deed to the house up. We can put up Fox. We can put up Shesterkin if we're really that bad for it. We might get divorced. We might get fired. But we still have assets we can leverage here to keep this going. And that's the way you have to think about this now. And there's the cynical read, and then there's the skeptical read. I am inclined to lean towards the cynical read of this, that Drury kind of knows they can't win the whole thing. But if he admits that, he gets fired. So he has to keep trying to manufacture that. And the reason I frame this conversation around the over-unders is because I think they tell you about the life cycle of a team. And we all know that sliding doors moment, the window closing, it happens a lot faster than you think it does. And sometimes it happens within a single season. The Rangers were in the fall of 2017 going into 2018. They'd made the playoffs the year before, but they were looking around. They were old. They were expensive. They were injured. And Jeff Gorton said, I don't think we got it. I don't think we have the cards, and we gotta get younger. We gotta get cheaper, and we gotta reset. And The Rangers don't even have like a remotely close path to being able to do that at this point. Like, yeah, you could just let Panarin expire or trade him away and then have have, 15, 20 million in cap space next summer, but you're not replacing that production in one offseason. That's a multi-year process, and that's 2 or 3 guys picking up that slack. And we know the biggest inefficiency in the NHL today is having that superstar, is having the one guy who can produce 100 points on his own at 12 million. Yeah, it's expensive, but that's infinitely better than having 5 guys who give you 20 points each. That one guy has so much more of a trickle-down effect to the rest of the offense, the only place trickle-down economics works. But when you think about it in the big picture and where the Rangers are at and just the straight-up conversation, they are going to make the playoffs barring disaster. We said that last year. Disaster happened. They missed the playoffs. They had to recalibrate. Chris Kreider had to wear it. Jacob Trouba had to wear it. They need to replace.
We had to wear it. The fans had to wear it. Everybody in MSG who paid hundreds of dollars a night to watch them do
no show. Just no show.
Yeah, be there physically.
I think about that Saturday matinee game against the Kings where it was like 7-2 after 2 periods. And the final 10 minutes of that game were just Sam and Joe going back and forth going, I can't believe it's this bad. I can't believe it's this bad. And that was the entire season, was us going back and forth. I can't believe they're this terrible. Look at all the
And they
talent.
still almost made the playoffs, by the way, which is the most hilarious thing like on the face of, like, genuinely. Think about how many times this season we said, oh my God, I can't believe they're this bad. They were 3 wins away from a playoff spot.
Okay. I really want this to work. Like, and that's like the undercurrent of all of this, that I understand why people are fed up. Like, one of my barometers, and you know this, and I've talked about this on the show a lot. I have 2 barometers. Number one, if somebody who is not very online brings up a specific talking point, my uncle who's not very online occasionally on Facebook asked me something about Will Cooley the other day, and I was like, damn, if the non-tapped in are banking their hopes on Will Cooley becoming a superstar, we're probably not in a great place if the expectation is, he needs to score 30 goals this upcoming season. And the other one is the comment section under articles in The Athletic. And the last 5 or 6 Rangers ones under Peter Ball articles, there's been one person who's commented the same thing every time, which is, they're not as good as the Panthers. You don't need to read this article. I promise. We'll come back and redo this next summer. And it's hard not to feel like that. It's so defeating. And ultimately, and this gets back to something I've talked about a lot on the Oilers show I do for over the last few weeks, because they've lost in the Cup final the last 2 years. If we're just waiting for the Rangers to eventually break through, we're going to end up like DiCaprio in Shutter Island, talking to ourselves and hallucinating things, because it's probably not going to happen. So we need to find ways to make these seasons worth it, to make these seasons enjoyable. A good example, and I was talking about this in the context of the Oilers, was Vasily Podkolzin going from a guy who was probably going to be in the KHL to someone who scored 10 goals and got to play with Draisaitl a lot last year. The problem with the Rangers was they didn't have anybody they gave any chances to last year. I was excited for Brett Berard to be here. I was excited for Brennan Othman and Gabriel Perreault to be here. They didn't get chances to play. I'm supposed to be excited about Will Borgen and Urho Vakanainen, guys who were drafted 10, 15 years ago by terrible teams that didn't want them. At the very least, you got to give me something to be optimistic about, even if it's, projection. And that's why we all love prospects and draft picks. They could be anything. Alexi Lafreniere could bounce back.
Even a boat.
Alexi Lafreniere could bounce back, be a 60, 70 point forward. And look, he's not as good as Tim Stützle, but if he's 80% as good as Tim Stützle, I'll take that. That's something I can build on. If Braden Schneider takes a step and maybe he's better than Borgen, Vakanainen, and Soucy, everybody other than Fox and Gavrikov, okay, you gave me something to be optimistic about. Adam Fox bounces back playing with a real partner. He gets into the Norris conversation again. Okay, you gave me something. But in the context of winning the whole thing, no, it's not happening with this group. There is not enough talent here. There is not enough cap space, even in the future. 2 years from now, when the cap's 115, 120 million, they're still not going to have another superstar to augment whatever they've lost in the time being. Do you really think Zibanejad and Trocheck are going to age all that gracefully when they're kind of struggling at 32 years old? That's really the lowdown, if you will. That's the stream of consciousness I've been working on over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, is just, we got to make something of these seasons because really quickly 1 year becomes 5 years. You know, as a Giant fan, I've been saying it's okay. We'll get them next year for 7 years now. And at a certain point, you're going to go insane if you keep doing that to yourself. So you got to find ways to make these seasons worth it, even if it's not going to end up in a cup.
Jackson Dart's looking good, and I don't even know football that well, but
that's something to be optimistic about, something to be hopeful about.
And that's the thing too is, you know, would you listen to the show because we tell you the truth? Like, we could lie to you and be like, oh my God, this team is going to be so much fun and we can't wait, and they're going to win 82 games and they're going to win the cup, and like pom poms are out, and we're not going to do that. We're going to tell you what's really going on and what the projection of this team looks like. And ultimately, or you like, even if you are the most rose tinted glasses wearing Rangers fan out there, you're going to tell me with a straight face that you think this team is going to win the Stanley Cup as currently presented. It's not going to happen. And, you know, like maybe that again, like best case scenario.
But that's why we come back.
Right.
That's why because you never know.
Right.
You never know.
Right. That's right. That's what the New York Lottery tagline is. Hey, you never know. Like,
that might be the slogan for the show for this upcoming season. Hey, you never know. We might get the cease and desist.
We're gonna get sued by the New York State Lottery. Yeah, but like, you know, ultimately, if like come February, the team could be, I don't know, like 40-10. And then Drury trades the worst players for the best players, somehow finds a way to make it work under the cap, and then we're gonna kumbaya our way to a cup win. Like, that can happen, and I would love for it to happen. So would Nick. This would be ultimately way more enjoyable, right? Like we'd be having so much fun. But is it likely? I doubt it. I wouldn't put money on it. But like, this is what the team is. This is what the franchise
the cards
currently
we got.
is. Yeah, like we're at the poker table, and we got the cards. We already have them.
We know what's in our hand. Yeah,
like we can't ask for a do-over. Like the chips are out. Everybody's got the cards. We got to play the hand that we were dealt, and this is the hand that the Rangers currently have at their disposal. Now you can argue that they made their hand, which they did, but you know, walk with me for a second. Like this, as somebody that isn't Chris Drury, I didn't make the hand. Nick didn't make the hand, and you, the person watching this or listening to this, didn't make the hand. So we have to play the hand that we were dealt, and this is what we have to play around with.
So the way I like to think about these things, just big picture, grand scheme. You hear me talk a lot about the idea of short-term, medium-term, long-term causes, how you get to where you are. And we all have a pretty good idea. I'm going to assume if you're listening to a Rangers podcast in late August that you are in tune with why the Rangers are where they are. The other thing I like to do is talk about range of outcomes, your probabilities. What's likely to happen? What's not likely to happen? What can you account for? What can you bank on? You know, we did that episode back in mid-July, and we got quite a few comments of people being like, wow, you guys sound relatively optimistic. Partly because last year was just that bad that even modest positive regression is going to make the team that much better. But that's how you have to think about these things, because if you can segment your brain effectively, think about what's going to happen. How do you get there? You know, if the goal is to get to 96, 97 standings points, you're going to need to win something in the ballpark of 45 regulation games. And then you have 10-ish overtime ones to play with. Once you get there, what's your path? You know, if you finish second in the division versus third, are you playing New Jersey, Carolina, Washington, maybe Columbus? I know we're both relatively optimistic about them. And where do you go from there? Well, you got to get there
goalie.
First.
Yeah.
You got to get there first. And making the playoffs is doable. But when you talk about the best case scenario for this team is very straightforward. You get an elite first pair that gives you enough. Fox, Gavrikov stay together majority of the season. They play really strong minutes at 5-on-5. And for the record, Adam Fox had a better goal share last year at 5-on-5 than Evan Bouchard, Demiro Heiskanen. He did not have a bad season. Just objectively, he did not. The team was that bad that it didn't matter how good Adam Fox was, how good Panarin was, how good Shesterkin was. So first, you have a really good first pair, you know, something like Ekholm and Bouchard, something like you get from Makar and Taves. That's your first thing. Number two, The power play positively regresses at least 5%. They were 28th in the NHL last year. If they get that to 20, and the Penguins power play last year with David Quinn running the show was top 10, if they even get to between 20 and 15 and the defense is a little bit better, that should be enough to get them back in the playoffs. And then if you want to do real best case, one of Cooley, Othman, or Perreault doesn't just play well, they hit. Perreault comes in and drops a 20-goal season in his first full season. Will Cooley goes up to 30. Brennan Othman gives them 50 to 60 points. Something you're really not expecting. The equivalent of that for 2 years ago, I would say, was the season you got out of Gustafsson. The 50, 60 points you got out of Eric Gustafsson is being like, wow, where did that come from? And ditto what you got out of Lafreniere that season, where we weren't really expecting those things to happen, but they were within the range of outcomes because they happened. And that's kind of where the best case scenario goes, because Shesterkin and Fox, for as much critique as they've gotten last year, they're pretty good. Shesterkin got like all-star for the season votes for 9th for goalie. He faced, I want to say, the 3rd most scoring chances of any goalie in the league. He was top 5 in goals saved above expected. He did everything he could. The team was awful. The team was a joke last year, and they still almost made the playoffs. So it won't take a lot to be where what we're going to get to right now, which is what I think is most likely to happen. I think the power play will bounce back. I think that'll be at least 20, 21%. I think the defense probably is 22nd as opposed to 28th. And then nothing else happens. Everybody gets within their career averages. They make the playoffs, and that's where they're at. And then the worst case scenario is the defense stinks outright again. And that's it. It's really straightforward. They redo what they did last year.
Yeah. I mean, the worst case scenario is the blue line continues to be extremely porous and the forwards don't back check. They don't help out at all, which we saw a lot of last year. And pretty like the worst case scenario is we run the same team and the same play that we had last year again. That's you really can't, I guess a worst case would be that happening and everybody gets injured, right? But I don't, injuries are something that I never want to happen to anybody. And, talking about is injuries are going to happen. It's just a matter, I don't want to make that a part of my prediction, because that just seems like everybody deals with injuries. Like it's difficult it's impossible to predict them sometimes, and it's not worth a prediction. But hopefully, obviously, of course, that doesn't happen. But the most reality check moment for me would be what happens and what their record is around July 1st, around the turn of 2026, and then where they are and what they do at the deadline. I think that tells me everything that we need to know about this team. Because if they are positively regressing, if they are actually trying to defend and actively trying to not lose games, then okay, all right, we're getting the ball rolling. Maybe Perreault has 10 goals before Christmas. Maybe Berard, chipping in a little bit. Maybe Othman finally gets off the schneid. I know he has 0 goals, but I mean, if you watch him play, he's he's hit so many posts and so many missed chances. He was just a little snake bitten last year. I do think that he will, get going next season. Maybe he gets going a little bit. Okay, well, now we're cooking. Maybe Braden Schneider actually does look like a top 4 defenseman. Maybe he does make that jump. Right. And then, okay, well, if he makes that jump, that makes the top 4 better. Right. Like it gives, it's Schneider and it's Borgen, and it's not the best, but it's a lot better than Borgen Soucy. I'll tell you that right now. You don't need me to tell you that. And then the bottom 6 could be maybe it's Soucy, maybe it's Vakanainen, who knows? And Scott Morrow. Maybe Scott Morrow makes the team out of camp and he looks good, and he's somebody that maybe he could slot in the top 4 in January. There's avenues here. There are avenues to success. It's up to the individuals at hand to get there, and then if they get there, okay, well then maybe they're cooking.
You know what I've always said, Andrew? I want my team to play like the 2022 Seattle Kraken. That's what I've always said when I'm thinking about my dream team. If I could emulate any organization, it would be the Kraken. It'd be the Sharks, the Canucks, perhaps. These are all teams I'd like to mine players from because of what great jobs they've done over the last handful of seasons. And the last thing I wanted to hit on before we wrapped on today's show and kind of started looking towards the season, the plan coming up is we have 5 episodes between now and the start of the NHL regular season. The season starts October 10th. The Rangers are playing the Penguins on opening night again. We'll see if Riley Smith can score a goal for either team, even though he's on the Golden Knights. There is a chance. Looking ahead, the plan tentatively is division by division preview for the first 4. And then the week the season starts, that Monday, we would do a Ranger-specific preview. The goal being to give you the lowdown, the cliff notes, because there's a lot of research that goes into doing prep for 32 teams worth of content. And that's the plan over the next few weeks to get you guys up to speed with what you need to know, the important questions, the potential breakout players, the good stuff to set you up to understand what the Rangers are walking into. Because we know big picture, the NHL at large is not as good as Gary Bettman says it is. He says everybody's in playoff contention through March, and that's because everybody's bad. That's because Detroit, Buffalo, and Ottawa all take turns beating each other. I know the Senators made the playoffs last year, but prior to last year,
you're forgetting that Buffalo, once they're out of the playoffs, become the 97 Red Wings, and then they start winning all these games that never end up mattering. But they love that. They're like
a good spoiler.
There's no better pastime for the Buffalo Sabres to, once they're finally out of a playoff spot, pretend that they are the best team in the NHL. It's really funny. I mean, it's sad if you're a Sabres fan, but objectively, as a fan of the sport, it's really funny that they do the same thing every single season when it comes to March.
And the plan is we're going to go Pacific, Central, Atlantic Metro, and then the Rangers specific one the week before. We will talk to you guys next week. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, throw in the show a 5-star review. It does help a lot more than you think. If you're over on YouTube, let us know your best, worst, and most likely scenarios for this upcoming season. We'll talk to you guys real soon.
Later.